certain degree, reading through this is fun, and then to another degree, it's not fun, because I had a high degree of certainty that everything was coming to an end right then and right there. And there were things that did happen, but as I learned more about what this bubble really is, I was looking at the bear trap and not the actual bubble. But I was going through the book and looking at a couple of things, and one entry kind of surprised me. And this is on November 10th, 2012. I said, is there a spell on people? Right? And as it turns out, to a degree, and I'm going to probably be making a video on this about the pyramid Tom DeLonge talked about in Alaska, that may actually be true. That there may actually be, if you will, a spell on the entire population. I'm not here to talk about how that is or why that would be, but it seems that there is something that's acting across the entire planet against our better desires. And so in the spring of 2013, I started the Libertarian Party Pierce-St Croix. And I started out just by, putting out information that we were going to be holding a caucus. And I remember that I put together a packet with a press release for the paper, a photo. I put out a story on the Hudson Patch. And if I recall correctly, my daughter came with me one morning. I think it was a Monday morning, but whatever morning it was so cold in Wisconsin in January that the schools had shut down in Hudson, actually across much of the Midwest, had shut down because of the cold. And so my youngest daughter was with me when I went to go put posters up with tear-off reminders around the county. And I remember because I began in River Falls, and right before I began, I stopped and I got gas at the gas station next to the bank. And after getting the gas and a little snack inside for us, I walked out, I sat down in the van, and I went, all right, here we go. And as I looked directly ahead of me, the bank clock said 11:11. And that entire day, we put up posters around businesses on the bulletin boards all over St. Croix County. And I did it another day, again, all over the area. And the press release was picked up by the local paper. I wrote letters to the editor. And on the day of the caucus, which I held at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls, and on the day of the caucus, I had invited anyone that I could think of that might come and help me form the Libertarian Party Pierce-St Croix. I'd gotten permission from the state party that I could start an affiliate, and it was going to be the first affiliate that anyone could remember starting in a long time. And so that's how the Libertarian Party Pierce-St Croix came into play. And in that, the newspaper, actually the editor for the River Falls Journal, actually came down and took photos and wrote a very nice story about the formation of the Libertarian Party Pierce-St Croix. And currently there is no active party, but we'll talk about why over the next couple of videos, because this was my first entry into what a libertarian was. I didn't really understand why it was a libertarian was going to be so difficult to get to meetings. And the answer is, we don't want to be organized, not for political purposes. And so it would be a very tumultuous number of years working with libertarians to come to the realization of what was really the best plan of action. But I started the caucus planning and got to the location, about 8 o'clock, put up my posters and all that. And it was a 9 o'clock start, and about 8:45, in walks a guy I didn't know and I didn't invite. And I thought, all right, there's hope. There's going to be people here today, but I don't know. There's at least one. And over the next 15 or 20 minutes, I would come to realize that the only other folks that would come were the folks that I had invited, and there were about 17 or 18 of us. And the individual who decided to come all by himself was a gentleman by the name of Joe. And Joe was my running mate when I ran for governor. And I'll talk a little more about Joe when I run when that time comes. But Joe showed up out of nowhere. A former Navy veteran, worked on the surveillance equipment, and imaging, which is why his profession was to work on copy machines. And it was just a pleasure to meet. He's a beautiful soul. And it was one of these opening moments like, hey, if you do something right, you get benefits. And probably one of the greatest benefits of starting the party was meeting Joe and becoming very good friends with him because we had so much in common. There would be another year of working with the Libertarian Party and joining them. And so the next part of that came at the convention, which was in March that year. And it was held in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. And I remember it was in an old drafty room. The AC would kick on and off. It was very loud. The communication had been kind of so-so, and as I found out, one very kind gentleman, John, had actually taken it upon himself to organize the whole thing, and I know Stinky was not grateful enough to the work that he did because it was really kind of him, but that was the place where I had the most incredible experience with a gentleman by the name of Professor Rusk from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I had asked to be able to speak at the convention. And they said, yeah, you're more than welcome to speak. We'll put you on the agenda. I think I was at 5 or 6 o'clock, right before dinner. And the dinner speaker, the primary, the keynote speaker, was this Professor Rusk from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And his specialty was futurism. He was a futurist. An elderly gentleman, probably in his mid to late 70s. He first listened to my presentation, and then he spoke second and actually was really kind to say what Mr. Burke has said here is actually very true. Blog posting and the individual utilizing the internet to spread their message is really the direction that we're going in. Afterwards, as I was chatting with him, just having a conversation, he did the most amazing thing. He said to me, I'm going to share a story with you, he says. About a year or two ago, and I think I've told this story. A year or two ago, I was at a conference in Toronto for futurists, and I got done with the session in one room, and right after that was the next session that I wanted to go to, so I decided to stick around. And in that interim, I just turned around and struck up a conversation with the gentleman behind me, who it turned out was there with the Navy War College. And he says, I said to the gentleman, don't break any secrecy oaths or anything, but can I ask what you're working on? And he says, and the guy looks at me and he says, well, right now we're working on marijuana legalization. And that was such a fascinating thing because it meant that there were other undercurrents going on in the legalization process and what was happening. Now, what that meant and what that was isn't the important part here, because the important part was that I had been told that there are forces moving in the direction of pro-legalization, which of course were true. But this very specific instance would play a role in how I decided to promote my campaign when I ran for governor. Professor Rusk is an amazing part of the story, in part because he represented very much what libertarianism and what libertarians are about. We want to learn things. We want to know things. It's about the freedom to understand. And when we're free to do that, we can make big progress in the world. We would have a special election in the spring, and I would be on the executive committee at that point as the representative for the 3rd Congressional District. We hadn't been redistricted yet into the 7th, but when we were redistricted into the 7th in Hudson, I became the rep for the 7th. Excuse me. And there was a special election in the 3rd District, and I asked, hey, are we going to run any candidates for that? And I was quite surprised that the party had no mechanism for getting a candidate in that race. And it took me about another 3 or 4 months to realize that the party didn't have a mechanism for planning for the 2014 elections. And so I began planning. Some of it was good planning, but some of it was unusually good planning. And I will talk about that in the next video. In the interim, in the light of Professor Rusk, I'm going to close with the oddest story of the day, which happened on April 29th, 2013. And I know this date because I'd been sitting in my office that morning and I'd been, watching my videos and reading the news. And one of my videos was on the UFO, latest sightings type of stuff from Third Phase of the Moon, those guys. And he was doing an interview of Steve Bassett, and Steve Bassett said, hey, don't miss the citizens' hearing on disclosure going on today at 9 a.m. at the National Press Club, or maybe it was 10, National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and it was a 5-day event, and I'm going to talk about that event separately. But what I want to note about that day was that not only did the hearing begin on that day, but that morning, and the picture's here in the book, I'll share it up here as well. But that morning, I'd been sitting at my desk, and I heard a helicopter. Not just a regular helicopter, one of the twin propeller ones, a Chinook. And where I had lived for 10, 11, 12 years. I worked from home. I was home during the days. I was home lots of weekends. I never remembered hearing helicopters. But on April 29th, 2013, the pattern changed. And since then, there's an active, I believe it's an Army, and there's also the Air Force down there as well, installations in the Twin Cities, and they've been flying helicopters over the Twin Cities for the last decade. And that began on April 29th, 2013. And in about 6 days, 7 days or so, I'm going to have a paradigm shift. Another one. And this one's going to really screw with me, because what I thought I knew and understood was completely changed. Hope you enjoy this week, and I'll talk to you next week. Peace.